Hello and welcome. Tonight, as you let the world outside fade, we will wander into places that history itself has abandoned. Not the famous battlefields carved into textbooks, not the towering names spoken in classrooms. No, tonight we drift into the ruins that lie quiet, where memories crumble beneath moss, where whole cities slipped from maps, where the firestorms of war erased laughter, music, and light. These are the forgotten cities of World War II, destroyed, silenced, and left behind. They are not the ones you hear about when people recall the war, yet their stones still whisper even if no one listens. The silence of ruins long since swallowed by moss. Streets where only wind walks now. The memory of cities that once rang with bells and laughter, reduced to whispers. Before we step into the firestorms of war, we must first feel the weight of absence, the ghostly hush where whole communities vanished. Here begins the story of forgotten cities, erased not only from maps but from memory itself. Coventry, November 1940. The night sky glowed with fire as wave after wave of bombers swept across the English city. Once, it had been a medieval jewel, its spires rising gracefully above timbered guildhalls and cobbled markets. But in a single night that jewel was smashed. The great cathedral, pride of the city, lost its roof and stained glass. Its walls stood open to the heavens like broken ribs, a skeleton of faith exposed to the night. The city would rebuild, but the ancient heart of Coventry, the winding streets and centuries of memory, never returned. What rose instead was concrete, modern and cold. The old Coventry became a ghost, living only in photographs and memory. Further south, across the Channel, St. Lo in Normandy wore the quiet dignity of stone churches and narrow lanes. But in the summer of 1944, liberation came not with gentle hands but with thunder. Bombs and artillery tore through the town, flattening its walls and shattering its people. The Allies called it a necessary step, but when the dust settled, St. Lo had become unrecognizable, a field of rubble with only a few walls standing. They called it the capital of ruins, a name that clung even as survivors tried to rebuild. Visitors pass through today, often unaware that the beauty of St. Lo, once centuries deep, had been wiped from the earth in a matter of days. Across the seas, Manila, the Pearl of the Orient, a city unlike any other, where Spanish fortresses stood beside American boulevards and Filipino neighborhoods breathed with music and life. In February 1945, that pearl shattered. For weeks, fire and blood drowned the streets. Entire districts were wiped out, their churches crushed, their families lost to massacres. By the end of it, Manila had joined Warsaw and Stalingrad among the most destroyed capitals of the war. But unlike those cities, Manila's name rarely echoes beyond its shores. Its wounds remain deep, but its story drifts forgotten in the world's memory. Königsberg on the Baltic coast lived with the rhythm of the sea and the shadows of its Gothic spires. It was the Amber City, home to philosophers like Immanuel Kant, a place where bridges crossed rivers with elegance and music-filled stone halls. But the war closed its fist around Königsberg. Bombed, besieged, and finally consumed, it did not survive. After 1945, the city was stripped of its name, reborn as Kaliningrad under Soviet hands, its ruins bulldozed, its identity erased, its memory buried. To walk the streets today is to walk a place rebuilt on silence, where the old city exists only in faded maps and yellowing photographs. A city not just destroyed but deliberately forgotten. In France, Oradour-sur-Glane was a small village, its cobbled lanes lined with shops, its square filled with Sunday bells. Then, in June 1944, German troops arrived. By nightfall, 600 villages were dead, the town burned to the ground. But unlike others, Oradour was never rebuilt. Its ruins were left as they fell, rusting cars in the streets, clocks melted on walls, shoes abandoned in homes. Grass grows through the stone now, but the silence is heavy. It is a place where time stopped, a village where absence speaks louder than memory. In Germany, Pforzheim was a city of artisans known for its jewelry and goldsmiths. But in February 1945, firestorms consumed it in less than half an hour. 22 minutes of bombing destroyed 90% of the city. Flames raced through its streets, suffocating oxygen, pulling life itself into the inferno. Unlike Dresden or Hamburg, Pforzheim is barely remembered beyond its borders, though its destruction was absolute. Today, the city thrives anew, but the old Pforzheim, the timbered houses, the artistry of centuries is gone forever, remembered only in silence. The Netherlands had hoped to escape such horror, but in May 1940, Rotterdam burned. In one afternoon, bombs flattened its medieval heart.
Narrow-gabled houses toppled into flames, and the canals reflected only smoke. It was a warning, a signal to surrender. The modern skyline now hides its scar, yet the old Rotterdam, centuries of history lost in hours, remains forgotten outside Dutch memory. Warsaw died twice, once in 1939 under German siege, again in 1944 during the uprising. The second death was worse. Entire districts dynamited house by house until 90% of the city was rubble. Libraries, palaces, and churches all reduced to dust. What stands now is rebuilt, a tribute to survival, but the Warsaw that Chopin once walked, that poets once sang about, is gone. Rebuilt, yes, but the original remains a ghost beneath the bricks. In Normandy, Caen bore the weight of liberation. For weeks, bombs and artillery reduced the city of William the Conqueror to ruin. Paris was spared. Caen was sacrificed. The scars still mark its stones, reminders of a city that paid the price for freedom, but seldom earns more than a passing footnote. Hamburg, July 1943. Operation Gomorrah. 8 nights of firestorms pulled oxygen from the air, dragging people into burning streets. 40,000 lives lost in a week. The Hanseatic jewel, with its timbered warehouses and proud merchant traditions, became ash. Dresden is remembered, Hamburg less so, though its pain was even greater. The old Hamburg vanished in those flames, its memory scattered in embers. Nuremberg, with its imperial halls and Gothic streets, was once a city of art and empire, but in 1945 it was reduced to rubble. The irony lingered. Hitler had staged rallies here to glorify a 1,000-year Reich, but the Reich ended in ashes, and with it, Nuremberg's medieval heart. Today, the city is remembered for the trials, not for the beauty that perished in fire. The old Nuremberg, Dührer's Nuremberg, is gone, a forgotten casualty overshadowed by guilt and judgment. Tokyo, March 1945. Not with an atomic blast, but with fire. Napalm and incendiary bombs rained down on wooden districts, and in one night, 100,000 lives were lost. More than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki, entire neighborhoods turned to ash, temples and gardens erased. Yet outside Japan, the Tokyo firebombing is little spoken of. It was an apocalypse in silence, a forgotten night that outdid even the bombs that ended the war. Beyond these names lie countless smaller places. Villages in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia burned until nothing was left but chimneys and silence. Places like Khartoum, where no stone stood after German troops passed. Hundreds of such towns vanished, never rebuilt, their names erased from maps. They were not only forgotten cities, they were forgotten worlds. And so we return to silence. The ruins are rebuilt, towers and roads rise again. But the cities that died in the firestorms are not the ones we walk through today. They are buried beneath modern glass and steel, beneath highways and supermarkets. Their absence is their story. Their whispers are their legacy. They remind us that war does not only take lives, it erases memory. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember them. The forgotten cities, lost forever, but not entirely gone. For as long as their story is told, their stones still whisper, even in silence. England, November 1940, the night when the sky above Coventry glowed not with stars, but with fire. A medieval city that had stood for centuries, proud of its spires, its timbered guild halls, its streets alive with the rhythm of markets and the quiet music of daily life. A place where bells rang from ancient towers and where light streamed through stained glass, painting the walls of its cathedral with colors of heaven. That Coventry was real, alive, filled with laughter and prayer, and then, in one night, it was changed forever. The Luftwaffe came, not in silence but with the hum of engines, the growing roar of wings that carried destruction. People looked up, some frozen in fear, others running for the shelters. Then, the bombs fell. Explosions rolled through the streets. Fire bloomed like 1,000 suns. Coventry became a furnace, a city consumed by storm and flame. The great cathedral, pride of Coventry, could not withstand it. First the windows shattered, the stained glass blown into shards that rained like colored stars. Then the roof collapsed, fire licking the beams until nothing remained but the walls, open now to the sky. It stood broken like the ribs of a skeleton, a scar against eternity. Where once hymns had risen, there was only the crackle of fire, the sound of stone breaking apart, and the long, aching silence of loss. Survivors crawled out from shelters. They walked through smoke, through ash, through streets they could no longer recognize. Places they had known all their lives, shops, pubs, schools, quiet homes, were gone. The heart of their city had vanished overnight. Yet even in ruin people gathered. They lit candles among the rubble. They prayed in the open air, the stars their ceiling, the broken walls their sanctuary. From destruction they found a fragile kind of peace.
But something deeper was lost. Coventry was not only a city of stone and wood, but of memory. The alleys that had carried the footsteps of generations, the marketplaces where merchants called out their wares, the songs of artisans working in their shops, the laughter of children chasing one another through crooked lanes. These sounds and sights did not return. After the war, the city would rebuild. Concrete rose where timber once stood. Wide new roads cut through the heart where narrow paths had once wound. Modernity replaced memory, and though Coventry was reborn, its medieval soul was gone. This was not just destruction, it was erasure, 1,000 years of history reduced to rubble, and then buried beneath progress. Today, visitors may stand before the ruined cathedral, preserved as a monument, and they may walk its walls and imagine what was lost, but the old Coventry, the living, breathing Coventry, is gone forever. Think of what was lost that night. The guild halls where craftsmen had gathered since the Middle Ages, the chapels filled with centuries of devotion, the old streets whose crooked stones remembered countless footsteps, the glow of stained glass that had once turned sunlight into divine light, all of it reduced to ash in hours. And yet, Coventry's destruction carried a strange legacy. It became more than just a city in ruin. It became a symbol of endurance, of survival, of reconciliation. The people who stood among the rubble chose not only to mourn, but to hope. They sent pieces of their shattered cathedral across the world as gestures of peace. They built a new cathedral beside the ruins, not to erase the past, but to stand with it, a living testament that life could rise even from ashes. But even symbols cannot bring back the lost streets. They cannot resurrect the voices that were silenced, or the small joys of ordinary life erased that night. When we think of Coventry, we often think of its cathedral, of its scarred walls left open to the sky. Yet around those walls lay an entire medieval city, forgotten beneath the weight of reconstruction, a city that once glowed with life, its memory carried now only in faded photographs and whispered stories. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking through Coventry as it was before, narrow lanes leading toward the cathedral, children playing in the shadow of spires, merchants selling wares beneath timbered beams, candles flickering in windows as evening fell, the quiet hum of a city that had lived through centuries. Then imagine all of it gone in a single night. That is the story of Coventry, not only of destruction but of forgetting. Because forgetting is its own kind of death. Buildings can be rebuilt, streets can be paved anew. But when memory fades, when the old rhythms are lost, something irreplaceable disappears. That is why Coventry matters, not only as a symbol of endurance, but as a warning. That war does not just break stone, it breaks memory. It turns vibrant cities into hollow shells. And when the world moves on, those cities risk being remembered not for what they were, but only for what they lost. On that November night in 1940, Coventry burned. Its cathedral became a skeleton of stone, its heart reduced to rubble. Survivors gathered in the cold and prayed among the ruins. They lit candles against the darkness, choosing hope even as ash fell around them. Out of that night, Coventry carried a message for the world, a message of survival, of peace, of reconciliation, but also a reminder that the old Coventry, the Coventry of spires and alleys, of laughter and markets, is gone forever. And yet in the silence of its ruins, the stones still whisper. They whisper of the lives once lived there, the songs once sung, the prayers once spoken. They whisper of a city that glowed with light and laughter until war silenced it. Coventry may be rebuilt. It may stand again as a city of the present. But the Coventry that died in 1940 lives only in memory, fragile and fading. If you walk there today, among the ruins of the old cathedral, you may feel it. The quiet echo of the past, the weight of absence, the strange mix of sorrow and peace. You may see candles flickering as they did in the aftermath, small flames standing against the vastness of loss. And you may understand for just a moment what it means when a city is not only destroyed but forgotten. That is the story of Coventry, the cathedral in ashes, the city erased, the memory fading. A place where war did not just take buildings, but entire centuries of life. A place that reminds us how fragile history is, how easily it can vanish, and how silence itself becomes the final monument. Normandy, the summer of 1944. The air was heavy with the sound of engines and the trembling of earth. In this corner of France stood Saint-Lô, a town that wore the quiet dignity of centuries. Stone churches rose above winding lanes. Market squares bustled with farmers selling their goods, children running between the stalls, voices lifting in the ordinary rhythm of life. It was not a grand city, not a capital of empires, but it carried the humble grace of history.
the kind of place that survives by simply being itself. Then came the storm. Liberation arrived, but it did not come gently. Allied bombs fell with relentless thunder, tearing through the narrow streets, shattering walls, turning roofs into falling fire. The mission was to break the German stronghold, to push open the road to freedom. But in the chaos of explosions and the roar of artillery, the soul of St. Lo was consumed. In hours, the town that had stood for centuries was flattened. Churches that had watched over generations fell in pieces, their bells silenced, their spires toppled. Houses crumbled into dust, their walls collapsing inward, crushing memories that had been carried for lifetime. The streets became rivers of rubble. Smoke hung over everything, thick and choking as though even the sky mourned. When the guns quieted, what remained was not a town but a ruin. Survivors crawled from cellars, blinking against the sunlight that fell on destruction. They looked for their homes, their shops, the landmarks that once guided them. But everything was gone. Farmers returned to where their markets had stood only to find broken stone and twisted wood. Mothers searched for the places where their children once played, but there was only rubble. St. Lo had been unmade, undone by the very liberation that was meant to free it. It was called the capital of ruins, a name that carried both tragedy and bitter irony. Liberation brought freedom, but it also took away the town itself. To walk through St. Lo after the summer of 1944 was to walk through silence. The city was no longer a place of life, but a graveyard of stone. And yet, even in ruin, people tried to return. They sifted through the rubble, lifting stones in search of anything that could be saved. A photograph, a trinket, a memory. They built makeshift homes among the wreckage, gathering what scraps they could. The spirit of survival was strong, but the St. Lo they rebuilt was not the St. Lo that had been lost. The medieval gem, with its winding lanes and quiet grace, was gone forever. Today, tourists pass through without knowing. They see the rebuilt town, the modern streets, the restored facades. But beneath every stone lies the memory of fire. Beneath every road lies the ghost of what once was. St. Lo is alive, but its soul, the centuries of life that gave it character, remains buried in 1944. To imagine what was lost, close your eyes and step back in time. See the church spires catching the morning light. Hear the bells ringing across fields, calling people to prayer. Smell the bread baking in the markets. Hear the chatter of farmers trading their goods. Imagine children racing down narrow lanes, laughter echoing against stone walls. That was St. Lo before the bombs. Ordinary, simple, beautiful in its ordinariness. And then imagine it all swept away in an instant. The bells silenced, the bread turned to ash, the laughter lost beneath rubble. That is what happened here. The tragedy of St. Lo is not only its destruction, but its obscurity. The world remembers Normandy for D-Day, for Omaha and Utah Beach, for the heroism of soldiers charging into fire. But the world forgets the quiet towns that were sacrificed along the way. St. Lo was one of them. Its story is overshadowed by larger battles, its loss hidden beneath the glory of victory. But for those who lived there, for those who returned to ashes, the loss was everything. Imagine the farmers who came back to nothing, their fields still green but their homes destroyed. Imagine the shopkeepers who walked into streets that no longer existed, their livelihoods turned to dust. Imagine the priests who stood where their churches had been, holding services under open sky. The ruins, their only walls. These people carried on, but they carried on in a place that was no longer theirs. The land remained, but the city they had known was gone. And still, life crept back in. Children were born in the ruins, families rebuilt. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the sound of falling bombs. Slowly, painfully, St. Lo stood again. But the St. Lo that rose was not the same as the one that fell. History had been broken, its threads severed. The old town lives now only in memory, in photographs that survive in faded albums, in stories passed down by those who saw the fire. Walk its streets today, and you walk on top of ghosts. Every step covers a place where something once stood. Every modern building sits where a piece of the medieval town once lived. Few stop to think of this. Few pause to feel the silence that lingers beneath the hum of cars and the chatter of shops. But if you listen closely, you might hear it. The faint echo of bells that no longer ring, the murmur of markets that no longer exist, the heartbeat of a city erased in the name of freedom. St. Lo reminds us of something difficult, that victory in war often comes at a price too great to measure. The Allies freed Normandy, yes. They pushed back tyranny, yes. But in doing so, they also destroyed lives and places that can never be replaced. This is not to diminish the triumph, but to remember the cost. Liberation came with thunder, but it also came with loss. It is easy to forget St. Lo, to pass it by as just another town in Normandy. But if you pause, if you let your mind drift back to 1944, you will see what is hidden beneath the surface. You will see the capital of ruins, the city that died in liberation, and you will feel the weight of absence. The absence of streets that no longer exist, of lives that were cut short, of beauty erased in the name of victory. St. Lo's story is not only about destruction, it is about the fragility of history. How centuries of life can vanish in hours, how towns can be erased not only by enemies but by those who come to save them. How memory fades, leaving behind only silence and whispers. As you drift into quiet tonight, carry St. Lo with you. Remember its spires, its markets, its lanes filled with laughter. Remember the fire that erased them and the silence that followed. Remember the people who stood among the ruins and chose to rebuild even when the past was lost. For in that choice lies both tragedy and resilience. St. Lo, the capital of ruins. A town once filled with dignity, reduced to rubble, rebuilt but never the same. A place where liberation came with fire, where victory erased memory, where silence lingers still. A reminder that war does not only take lives, it takes the cities that carry them. And when we forget, those cities vanish a second time. February 1945. Manila, once known as the Pearl of the Orient, stood shining along the edge of the Pacific. Its streets carried centuries of history. Spanish stone fortresses guarded the bay, their cannons long silent, their walls etched with the weight of empire. American-style boulevards cut wide across the city, lined with theaters, schools, and the hum of modern life. And in the neighborhoods, Filipino families wove daily life through markets, kitchens, songs, and prayers, an intricate tapestry of cultures, blended but distinct, layered by time itself. Manila was alive, radiant, and proud. But war was closing in. The Pacific had become a storm, and the Philippines sat in its path. When the Japanese dug in for their last defense, and the Americans advanced to liberate, Manila became the battlefield. For 1 month it endured a siege that would turn beauty into ashes. Liberation here was not swift, not clean, it was fire. The city drowned in chaos. Bombs fell, artillery thundered, and buildings that had stood for centuries collapsed in moments. But it was not only the clash of armies that destroyed Manila, it was the fury unleashed upon its people. Civilians trapped between opposing forces became the unwilling sacrifice. Streets that once echoed with laughter and markets ringing with barter now ran with blood. Families huddled in churches, believing the ancient stones would protect them, only to find the sanctuaries turned into tombs. The destruction was merciless. Entire districts burned. Ancient churches that had survived earthquakes and storms crumbled under shell fire. The grand colonial buildings, ornate facades carved with pride, were reduced to smoking bones. The walled city of Intramuros, the old Spanish heart of Manila, once a fortress of heritage, became rubble. History was buried beneath fire and stone, erased in days. But beyond the broken buildings, beyond the rubble, it was the lives that marked the deepest scar. Thousands of civilians perished, not just from bombs, but from massacres that defied comprehension. Families slaughtered, neighborhoods wiped out, innocents caught in a tide of cruelty that still chills the memory. In 1 month, Manila lost not only its architecture, not only its streets, but its very soul. The survivors wandered through smoke and ruin. Parents carried children who would never again laugh. The old wept before shattered shrines, their prayers swallowed by silence. Manila was no longer a city. It was a wound, raw and gaping, carved into the heart of the Philippines. And yet, unlike Hiroshima, unlike Berlin, unlike Warsaw, Manila's story seldom finds its way into the pages of history. Its tragedy is not remembered in monuments known around the world. The Pearl of the Orient, once radiant, was shattered and then left in silence. Its destruction, though one of the worst among all cities in the Second World War, faded from global memory. Close your eyes and try to imagine the Manila that once was. The Spanish plazas alive with music where couples strolled beneath lantern light. The American-style theaters glowing with marquee signs, their stages echoing with songs and laughter. The Filipino neighborhoods alive with aromas of food, with the sound of roosters crowing at dawn, with children running barefoot across streets paved with stone. Imagine it all, stitched together in harmony. That was Manila, the pearl, shining on the edge of the Pacific. And then imagine fire. Imagine walls collapsing, roofs aflame, churches cracking as their bells fell silent. Imagine markets gone in an instant, theaters turned to smoking shells, neighborhoods drowned in fear. Imagine the roar of guns echoing where once there had been music. Imagine silence descending over streets filled with the dead. That was Manila in 1945, the pearl shattered beyond recognition. Today, when we speak of cities destroyed in war, names like Dresden or Hiroshima rise first to the mind. But Manila was among them, its destruction one of the greatest of the war. Its death toll among civilians rivaled some of the darkest chapters of conflict. And yet, the world forgets. Manila's suffering lingers in the margins, remembered mostly by those who call the Philippines home, carried in whispers, in family stories, in unmarked graves. But the memory matters, because when a city like Manila is forgotten, it is lost twice, once in fire, and again in silence. Its beauty deserves remembrance, its pain deserves acknowledgement. The Pearl of the Orient was not only destroyed by bombs and cruelty, but by the world's neglect to tell its story. Yet even in ruin, life returned. Filipinos are resilient. Out of ashes, they rebuilt. The modern city rose where the old one had fallen. But it is not the same Manila. The centuries-old churches, the Spanish fortresses, the colonial buildings, many of them are gone forever. The tapestry of cultures woven slowly over time was torn apart. The city that emerged is alive, but it carries a scar that never fades. Beneath its streets, beneath its concrete, the ghosts of the pearl still linger. Walk through Manila today, and the hum of traffic, the rise of towers, the rush of modern life might distract you. But if you pause, if you look carefully, you will find fragments. A wall that survived intramuros, a church facade still standing, a memory etched into stone. And in those fragments, if you listen closely, you may hear the echo of a city that once was, the Pearl, shining, proud, now only a whisper. The story of Manila is not simply about destruction. It is about the fragility of beauty, about how quickly centuries can vanish, about how memory itself can be silenced if not spoken aloud. It is about people who lived, loved, dreamed, and then vanished in fire. And it is about those who endured, who rebuilt, who carried Manila forward even when its past lay buried. As you drift into quiet tonight, carry Manila with you. Picture its plazas alive with music, its churches glowing in candlelight, its streets humming with life. Picture also the fire, the silence, the grief. Remember the pearl that was shattered, and know that though the world may forget, you need not. For cities like people live as long as they are remembered. Manila, February 1945. A capital destroyed, a jewel erased, a tragedy too great to measure, its brilliance swallowed in silence, its memory carried only in fragments, and yet, in the resilience of its people, the pearl still glimmers faintly, refusing to be lost forever. A Prussian jewel on the Baltic, Königsberg once stood as a city of spires and amber light. Its streets curved with the elegance of centuries, lined with houses that carried the weight of Gothic stone and Baroque grace. The city's heartbeat was its university, halls where minds gathered, where Immanuel Kant once walked in quiet thought, where philosophy itself found a home among cobblestones and books. Bridges stretched across the Pregel River, arching like delicate ribs, tying together neighborhoods filled with music, trade, and the scent of the sea. For hundreds of years, Königsberg was not simply a place. It was an idea, an amber city where history, intellect, and beauty converged. But in the summer of war, beauty could not shield it. The bombs came first. British raids tore into its heart, firestorms consuming the old quarters where timbered houses leaned over narrow lanes. Roofs collapsed into the streets. Windows that had reflected the Baltic sun for centuries shattered in a single night. The sound of bells was drowned in sirens, and the university's libraries, filled with manuscripts and wisdom collected through the ages, became ash swirling into the sky. The city survived the bombs, though scarred, still recognizable. But the siege was yet to come. In 1945, the Red Army encircled Königsberg. What began as bombardment became annihilation. Artillery roared for days, shaking the ground until even the stones seemed to tremble. Families huddled in cellars, clutching children, waiting for walls to fall. The Gothic cathedral, once a monument to faith and artistry, stood battered, its towers cracked, its windows blown out. Bridges collapsed into the Pregel, severing the veins of the city. And when the soldiers entered, fire and fury consumed what remained. Streets were not merely broken, they were emptied. Lives ended in silence. Entire neighborhoods disappeared in smoke. When the siege ended, Königsberg was no longer a city. It was rubble stretching to the horizon, smoldering beams where homes once stood, shattered spires jutting into the air like broken teeth. The survivors wandered through this ruin, stunned, their city unrecognizable. Yet what made Königsberg unique was not only that it was destroyed, it was that it was erased. After 1945, the victors gave the city a new name,
Kaliningrad, the amber jewel, the Prussian city of spires and philosophers, was buried beneath Soviet blocks and Stalinist concrete. Its ruins were bulldozed. Its German identity was scrubbed away. The cathedral that survived the siege lingered as a ghost, neglected for decades, its stones blackened and hollow. The bridges were not rebuilt as they were, but replaced by faceless structures of utility. The narrow Baroque streets that once wound like veins through the city center were straightened, widened, or obliterated entirely. What rose in their place was not Königsberg reborn, but something altogether different, a city without its memory. Imagine a traveler today walking those streets. They would see wide boulevards lined with concrete housing blocks, faceless towers, and utilitarian squares. They would see a Soviet city alive with traffic and voices, but missing something intangible. For beneath that concrete, under the layers of post-war reconstruction, lies a city that cannot be seen, only remembered. A city that existed for centuries and then vanished by deliberate design. Königsberg was not only bombed into ruin, it was forgotten by intention. And yet fragments still whisper. The cathedral, rebuilt after decades of neglect, stands again, though as a shadow of what once was. A monument to Kant still lingers, though the city he loved is gone. The river still flows, though the bridges he crossed are no more. A few corners still hint at the amber city that once was, but they are fragments, faint and fragile. The rest is silent. What does it mean for a city to lose not only its stones, but its very name? To have its identity severed from its past, its people scattered, its heritage deliberately erased? Königsberg is not simply a destroyed city. It is an absence, a wound that cannot be found on a modern map. Its memory survives in books, in paintings, in photographs, in the stories of those who fled.
But for those who walk its streets today, the memory is buried deep, hidden beneath layers of concrete, hidden behind a name that does not belong to it. Close your eyes and imagine the Königsberg that was. The amber glowing in shop windows traded from the Baltic shores, the sound of a university lecture echoing across oak-paneled halls, the bridges crossing the river like delicate threads, the spires rising high, casting long shadows in the northern sun. Imagine its markets alive with merchants and its streets echoing with laughter. That was the city that lived for centuries. Now imagine silence, imagine rubble, imagine a name struck from memory and replaced with another. That is Königsberg's story. Few remember it now. To most, Kaliningrad is simply another Russian city marked by industry and military presence, its past obscured. But for those who choose to remember, Königsberg remains something different. A city of intellect, of amber, of bridges, of music and philosophy. A city that once shone brightly, then was consumed by war and buried by politics. The tragedy of Königsberg is not only that it was destroyed, but that it was denied. Destroyed cities like Warsaw and Dresden rebuilt themselves, carrying their scars proudly, wearing their ruins as memory. But Königsberg was not allowed to return. Its stones were scattered, its soul buried. It became a ghost, not in ruins, but in silence. As you drift deeper into quiet tonight, let Königsberg's story linger in your thoughts. Think of the city that lost its name, the jewel erased, the home of a philosopher reduced to whispers, a city that once shone on the Baltic, now hidden beneath another face. Though forgotten by design, it still waits in memory, fragile, flickering, a light that refuses to go out entirely. Königsberg, bombed, besieged, burned, erased, a city destroyed not only in war but in remembrance, a city that reminds us that to forget is another kind of ruin, and though it may no longer live on the map, it survives in memory, carried softly, like the glow of amber in the dark. France, June 1944. A summer day in the Limousin countryside where fields stretched green and golden, and the air carried the scent of bread from village ovens. Oradour-sur-Glane lay quiet, its cobbled lanes lined with stone houses, its church bells ready to ring for Sunday Mass. Life moved gently here, unhurried, untouched by the great storms of war that raged elsewhere. Children played in the dust, merchants sold their goods, and neighbors greeted one another with familiarity born of generations. It was a village of routine, of comfort, of ordinary joys. But on this day, time would stop. The German troops arrived without warning. The villagers had heard rumors of fighting, whispers of battles far away, but they did not expect what came. Soldiers poured into the streets, their boots echoing on the cobbles, their voices harsh, commanding. Families were gathered, pushed into groups, confusion heavy in the air. Mothers clutched children, fathers tried to calm them, not knowing the darkness that was about to fall. By evening, Oradour was no longer a village. 600 lay dead. Men were shot in barns, their bodies burned where they fell.
Women and children were herded into the church, the sanctuary of faith twisted into a tomb. Fire consumed them as smoke filled the air. The bells that once called the faithful rang no more. Houses were set alight, their beams collapsing into ash. The bakery, the school, the blacksmith shop all became cinders. What had been ordinary life just hours earlier was reduced to silence and ruin. Yet, unlike other places destroyed in war, Orador was never rebuilt. It was left as it fell, frozen in that single day. The ruins remain untouched, a village where time stopped. Walk its streets now and you walk among ghosts. Rusting cars still sit where they were parked, their metal eaten by years but their presence unbroken. Sewing machines rest on tables, their wheels locked forever. Clocks stopped at the hour of death, their hands pointing to eternity. Bullet holes scar the walls, silent testimony of violence that cannot be erased. Grass grows over shoes once worn by children who never came home. Orador is not forgotten by historians. It is studied, remembered, honored, but by time itself it seems abandoned, left in a strange eternity. Where other villages rebuilt, rising again with the stubborn resilience of life, Orador stands still. It does not breathe, it does not grow. It remains a wound, open and unhealed, preserved so that forgetting is impossible. Yet its silence is heavy, almost unbearable. Here, memory does not fade with the years. It lingers like smoke that refuses to clear. The choice to leave Orador untouched was deliberate, to preserve its ruins as a memorial, to show what war can do to the innocent, to force future generations to see what cannot be denied. It is not a museum crafted by curators, not a reconstruction designed to illustrate. It is the real thing. Every stone stands where it fell. Every wall carries scars that no hand has altered. To walk through Orador is to step into June 1944, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the dead. And yet, even preserved, Orador risks a second kind of forgetting. Not erasure, but distance. The world turns, new wars come, new tragedies unfold, and the names of old ones fade. Visitors pass through the ruins with cameras, snapping pictures, pausing briefly, then moving on. Few linger long enough to listen to the silence, to feel the weight of 600 voices cut short. Orador is remembered, but not always felt. It exists, but like a fading photograph, it risks becoming only an image, not an experience. Close your eyes and try to imagine the day before, the cobbled lanes alive with neighbors, the baker's oven glowing, the sound of laughter spilling from open windows. Then imagine the soldiers arriving, boots pounding, commands shouted. Imagine the fear, the confusion, the sudden unraveling of ordinary life. Imagine fire consuming the church, the cries silenced, the smoke rising into the summer sky. Imagine the silence that followed, the silence that still lingers. That is Orador sur Glane, the day time stopped. Today, grass grows where families once lived. Flowers bloom between the cracks of burned stone. Nature does not forget, but it does not grieve. It simply reclaims. And so Orador stands as both ruin and garden, a place where memory and time intertwine. It is a warning, a lesson carved in silence. Yet it is also a place where absence itself becomes the memorial, where what is missing is more powerful than what remains. To wander here at dusk is to feel history not as words in a book, but as breath on the back of your neck. The ruined walls cast long shadows, the rusted cars gleam faintly in fading light. The silence deepens until even your own footsteps feel intrusive. Orador is not merely a ruin, it is a presence. It reminds you that the ordinary can be undone in a single day, that lives can vanish so completely, and that even memory itself can fracture if not carefully guarded. The villagers of Orador did not choose to be martyrs. They did not choose to be symbols. They lived ordinary lives until war turned them into an eternal story. Their tragedy is not just the number of dead, but the fact that their entire community was frozen in time, unable to move forward, unable to rebuild. They remain forever in June 1944. And as night falls over the ruins, the silence deepens further. The bullet holes, the melted clocks, the rusting metal, they whisper, but only if you are willing to listen. Orador is a place where history waits for remembrance, where time itself holds its breath. It is not forgotten, but it is not alive. It lingers in between, a village suspended in mourning. As you rest tonight, let Orador's silence stay with you. Think of its cobbled streets, its frozen clocks, its grass-covered shoes. Think of a place where time stopped, where life was turned to ash in a single day. Remember that what happened there was not just history, it was human. Ordinary people living ordinary lives undone in a moment. Orador remains as their testament, a ruin that refuses to fade, a voice carried in silence. The daytime stopped and never began again. Germany, February 1945. A winter night in the Black Forest, cold and quiet, the hills holding the city of Pforzheim in their arms. It was a place known not for armies or fortresses, but for beauty and craft. The city glimmered with the delicate hands of goldsmiths and jewelers, its workshops turning metal and stone into treasures sought across Europe. Timbered houses leaned gently into narrow streets, and the warmth of firelight flickered through their windows. It was not a city of conquest, but of creation. It was not a city of generals, but of artisans. And yet, in 22 minutes, it became a furnace. The Royal Air Force came with their plan of devastation. The night sky filled with the low hum of engines. The darkness broken by the first flares dropped to mark the target. Then the bombs fell, not in waves stretched over hours, but in a storm compressed into less than half an hour. High explosives tore open the heart of the city, shattering roofs, blowing open streets, collapsing walls. Incendiaries followed, raining fire onto wood, onto cloth, onto flesh. In moments, Pforzheim became a blazing pyre. 90% of the city was gone before the hour was out. 22 minutes, that was all it took for centuries of life to collapse into smoke. The timbered houses, dry from winter and close-packed in medieval streets, caught fire almost instantly. Flames leapt from roof to roof, racing faster than people could flee. Families trapped in cellars suffocated as fire consumed the oxygen above them. Streets became rivers of flame, choked with ash and cinders that glowed red against the black sky. Survivors stumbled through what was left, blinded by smoke, skin scorched, carrying whatever fragments they could save from a city that was no more. Imagine that silence after. The roar of bombs gone, replaced by the crackling of fire devouring what little remained. The night sky glowed like dawn, though the sun was nowhere to be found. Survivors wandered in shock, their shoes crunching on glass, their ears still ringing from the thunder. In less than half an hour, Pforzheim was erased. Not slowly, not over weeks or months of battle, but in minutes. That was its tragedy, swiftness, merciless and absolute. And yet who remembers? Dresden, Hamburg, these are the names that linger in global memory, the great infernos of Germany. But Pforzheim, the city of gold, the jewel in the Black Forest, is often forgotten. Overshadowed by the scale of destruction elsewhere, its story slipped into silence. But for those who lived, for those who saw the fire consume their streets, it was no less an apocalypse. The artisan's city was gone. The workshops where gold was shaped into beauty, ash. The guild halls where generations had gathered collapsed. The narrow lanes, the squares filled with chatter, the rhythm of bells, all gone. Pforzheim's destruction was nearly total. To rebuild meant starting not from ruins, but from absence. There was nothing left to repair, only emptiness to fill. In the months that followed, survivors carried both defeat and annihilation in their hearts. They had lost not only the war, but the very essence of their home. Many spoke of the night as though it were unreal, a nightmare too vast to grasp. For how can a city vanish in 22 minutes? How can centuries collapse into a single night? Today, Pforzheim stands again, but not as it was. Modern towers and concrete rise where timber and stone once stood. The old city, the jewelry box of half-timbered houses, the medieval streets that twisted like veins, remains forever lost. The character, the artistry, the gentle beauty of what once was cannot be rebuilt. It lives only in memory, in faded photographs, in the voices of survivors who watched their city dissolve into flame. If you walk through Pforzheim now, you might see a bustling modern city. You might see glass towers reflecting the Black Forest hills, highways filled with cars, shops humming with life. But if you pause, if you imagine the night sky lit not by neon but by fire, if you hear the faint echo of bells silenced by bombs, you may sense what is missing. The city of goldsmiths, the city of artisans, the city of timber and stone, forever gone, erased in minutes. Close your eyes and try to picture it. Narrow streets lined with workshops, the sound of hammers tapping gold into shape, the glow of lamps in windows, families gathered by the hearth. Then picture the sudden roar of engines, the flares falling, the whistle of bombs, the rush of fire. Picture the night turning to day in flame, the air itself burning, the people running, stumbling, falling. Picture the silence that followed, the ash that settled, the city gone. That is Pforzheim, the inferno in minutes. History remembers in uneven lines,
Some names are etched in bold, others in fading ink. But the suffering, the loss, the destruction, it does not matter how large the city was or how well known. For those who lived in Pforzheim, their world was as real, their loss as complete as any other. They too lost a city, a home, a way of life. They too carry the silence of absence. As night comes again over the Black Forest and lights glow in modern windows, the old Pforzheim lingers in the shadows, not in its streets, for they are gone, but in memory. In the stories told of that February night, in the fragments that refuse to fade, the city of goldsmiths turned to ash, the jewel of artisans consumed by fire, the inferno that came in 22 minutes and left only silence. And as you rest, let Pforzheim's story remind you how fragile beauty can be, how quickly centuries can be undone, how easily memory can vanish unless we choose to hold it. For cities like people survive in remembrance, and though Pforzheim's old self is gone, its spirit lingers in fire, in silence, in the fragile glow of memory that refuses to be extinguished. May 1940. The Netherlands, flat and windswept, a land of dikes and canals, tulip fields and windmills, still held hope that the war could pass without touching its cities. Rotterdam, a city of harbors and merchants, of narrow streets lined with gabled houses, of churches and markets alive with centuries of trade, believed itself protected by diplomacy, by geography, by the fragile hope that conflict might spare it. The city had grown along the waters, its canals reflecting the sky, its docks alive with ships from every corner of Europe carrying goods, news, and stories. Life moved along predictable rhythms, and for a moment there was calm. But calm is fragile, and in May 1940, that calm shattered. German forces advanced through the Low Countries, a tide of steel and strategy. Rotterdam became a target, not for military necessity alone, but for intimidation. The Luftwaffe arrived over the city on that fateful day with orders to break resistance, to show the world what modern warfare could do. What followed was not slow, not measured. It was a storm compressed into a single afternoon, a firestorm born of speed and terror. The sky above Rotterdam darkened with planes, flares dropped to mark targets, and then the bombs fell in waves. They struck the medieval heart first, the streets so narrow that fire spread like liquid. Gabled houses, some centuries old, caught immediately, their wooden beams fueling the blaze. Windows shattered, roofs collapsed, and the fire leapt across streets, across canals, consuming everything in its path. Smoke rose in thick black columns, blotting out the sun, curling over the harbor like a living thing, swallowing church spires and market squares alike. People ran without direction. Families abandoned homes, clutching children, dragging carts, carrying whatever they could salvage, but there was almost nothing to save. The water of the canals, so central to Rotterdam's life, became a mirror of fire and death, reflecting flames, bodies, and debris. Horses and livestock panicked, their cries lost among the roar of explosions. Streets that had once echoed with footsteps, laughter, and the ringing of bells became rivers of fire and ash. In just one afternoon, the medieval city was gone. Buildings that had survived floods, storms, and centuries of human life collapsed in minutes. The city's soul, woven from history, trade, and daily lives, was reduced to rubble and smoke. Rotterdam was no longer a place of commerce or community. It became a warning. The message was clear. Modern warfare does not negotiate, it annihilates. The fate of one city could be imposed upon many, and those who watched from afar could not ignore the lesson. Yet outside the Netherlands, the story of Rotterdam is barely whispered. The destruction is not as widely remembered as the infernos of London or the devastation of Warsaw, though it was a harbinger of what was to come across Europe. Modern maps do not show the ghost of what once was. Travelers walk through Rotterdam today, admiring its skyline of glass and steel, its bustling harbor, its avenues of commerce, without realizing that beneath the surface lies a city that was erased in a single afternoon. The medieval port that once reflected the lives of merchants and artisans, of families and communities, survives only in photographs, in accounts, in the faint memory of those who lived through it. Imagine walking those streets before May 14th, 1940. Picture the gabled houses leaning over narrow canals, flowers spilling from window boxes, the smell of bread and coffee drifting from bakeries, the sound of horse-drawn carts crossing cobblestones. Imagine children playing along the docks, fishermen hauling in nets, merchants calling out prices in open-air markets. Imagine the rhythm of life, steady, ordinary, predictable, alive. And then imagine the sky falling, imagine the roar of engines above, imagine Imagine bombs tearing the city apart. Imagine fire consuming everything in moments. Imagine the panic and screams, the smoke and the ash. That was Rotterdam, the day it became a warning in flames. The destruction was total. Ancient churches crumbled into rubble, their towers bent or broken. Market halls, which had hosted generations of trade, became charred skeletons. Canals filled with debris and fire, streets turned into rivers of glowing embers, bridges collapsed. The city's infrastructure, its lifeblood, was severed. Survivors stumbled among ruins, many injured, many weeping, many silent, carrying in their eyes the reflection of a city gone. The harbor, once vibrant with ships and goods, became a scene of desolation. Fireboats tried to respond, but the speed and intensity of the blaze were overwhelming. Within hours, the heart of Rotterdam was ash, and the world saw what modern war could do to urban life. In the aftermath, Rotterdam became a symbol, though not always recognized. A warning to others, yes, but also a testament to human endurance. Survivors emerged from the rubble, dazed and grieving, to confront a city that had vanished. Homes, schools, workplaces, churches, all gone. Families tried to find one another amid the destruction, searching for what remained of friends and loved ones. And yet the city had to be rebuilt, for life could not remain suspended. But rebuilding meant erasing the old, reconstructing in a different image, replacing history with new streets, new buildings, new architecture that bore little resemblance to the medieval port that had existed before the storm. Modern Rotterdam, with its skyline of sleek glass towers, wide avenues, and busy ports, is a testament to resilience. It is vibrant, alive, and proud, but it is also a city that carries a hidden scar. Beneath the concrete and steel lies a ghost, the medieval city that was flattened in a single afternoon, a city of gables, of timber, of narrow canals, of human life now gone. Its absence is invisible to most, yet palpable to those who pause to remember, to imagine, to see what the eye cannot. The story of Rotterdam reminds us that war does not merely take lives, it takes the ordinary, the everyday, the structures that shape how people live, how they meet, how they grow. In moments, centuries of community and craft, of streets and homes can vanish. And when we forget, when the world moves on to other stories, we risk erasing not only the past, but the lessons it carries. Rotterdam is a warning still if we are willing to look. Imagine standing in a modern square in Rotterdam today. You see sleek buildings, cafes, pedestrians, bicycles gliding past, the hum of a city alive. Beneath your feet, under the asphalt and concrete, lie the streets of 1940. Canals that once carried barges now channel only water. The gabled houses, the market halls, the churches, they all exist only in memory, in photographs, in the accounts of those who survived. Yet if you listen carefully, you might hear it, the echo of fire, the rush of chaos, the whisper of a city that no longer exists in the form it once did. Rotterdam is both tragedy and lesson. It teaches how quickly life, stability, and culture can be undone by the machinery of war. It reminds us that the ordinary is fragile, that what seems permanent is, in fact, impermanent. And it also reminds us that the human spirit, though battered, endures. Out of the ash and ruin, Rotterdam rose again. Its people rebuilt homes, reopened businesses, re-established markets. Life returned, and the city continues to thrive. But the shadow of that afternoon lingers, a silent witness to what was lost. Close your eyes and let your imagination take you back. Picture the canals reflecting the sun, the narrow streets alive with footsteps and voices, the markets filled with merchants, the church bells ringing, and then picture the sky darkening, bombs falling, roofs collapsing, fire racing along streets, smoke filling the air, people fleeing, children crying, parents desperate. The city disappears in hours, centuries of history reduced to rubble. That is the Rotterdam of May 1940. A city erased, a warning in flames, a ghost that lingers beneath the modern skyline. Even now, when the city is bustling, the past waits beneath. It waits in the shadows, in the memory of those who survived, in the photographs preserved in albums, in the stones unearthed during construction. Rotterdam's history was violent, abrupt, and almost entirely obliterated, yet it survives in memory. The modern city, with all its life and energy, carries its hidden scar quietly, invisibly beneath the surface. As you drift into quiet tonight, let Rotterdam's story linger with you. Remember its narrow streets, its gabled houses, its canals, its markets, its ordinary life, and then remember the fire that came in a single afternoon. Think of the people who lived and died, the buildings that fell, the streets that vanished, and remember that what was lost is not gone entirely, so long as memory carries it forward. Rotterdam, a city flattened in hours yet alive forever in memory, a warning in flames, a lesson whispered across generations. Poland, 1939. The air over Warsaw was heavy with tension, a city that had long carried the weight of history and culture, now bracing itself for war. Streets that had echoed with horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of merchants, and the music of Chopin in salon, now trembled under the shadow of tanks rolling across cobblestones. Warsaw had grown over centuries as a place of elegance, of Baroque avenues lined with palaces, libraries that housed the knowledge of generations, churches whose spires reached toward heaven. Its heart was vibrant, a city alive with artistry, commerce, and the rhythm of ordinary life. Yet in September 1939, the first storm descended. The German siege began swiftly, methodically. Bombs rained down from the sky, targeting military positions but sparing nothing else. Hospitals, schools, and homes were caught in the crossfire. Families fled from neighborhoods that had sheltered generations, carrying whatever they could grasp, leaving behind furniture, heirlooms, the scent of home. Smoke rose above the skyline, black and thick, blotting out the sun. The city endured, but the damage was profound. Buildings collapsed, streets were torn open, and life itself seemed suspended between destruction and survival. Warsaw had fought, but its soul was scarred. Then came 1944. The Warsaw Uprising, a daring act of defiance, a city rising against occupation with courage that burned as fiercely as any flame. Thousands of fighters, men and women, took to the streets with makeshift weapons, determined to reclaim their city. Civilians supported them, feeding them, tending to the wounded, risking everything for a fleeting hope of freedom. For 63 days, the city became a battlefield. The air was filled with gunfire, the roar of artillery, the cries of the wounded, the whistle of shells falling into homes, streets, and churches. Warsaw fought not as an army, but as a people united by the desire to live on their own terms. But the retaliation was merciless. The German forces moved systematically, house by house, street by street, reducing entire districts to rubble. Palaces that had survived centuries of political upheaval were blown apart. Libraries, repositories of culture and history were set ablaze, their pages curling into smoke. Churches that had stood for centuries, witness to baptisms, weddings, and funerals, were leveled, their spires crushed into the streets. Families were killed, imprisoned, displaced. Children wandered among ruins, their play replaced by survival, their innocence stolen in hours of fire. Warsaw, once proud and vibrant, was being erased. By the end of the uprising, the devastation was nearly total. 90% of the city lay in ruins. Streets became rivers of rubble. Houses vanished, leaving only foundations and scorched earth. Monuments were destroyed, art lost, the physical traces of centuries obliterated. Warsaw had been killed once, and now it died again, not in a single act, but through a methodical campaign to erase not only life but memory. The city was transformed into a ghost. Its people were displaced, its buildings gone, its history threatened with oblivion. And yet Warsaw endured. Its citizens returned slowly amid ruins and ash. They began the monumental task of rebuilding. With iron resolve, they raised new structures, reconstructed streets, restored squares, and erected facsimiles of the palaces, churches, and public buildings that had been destroyed. The second Warsaw emerged, a city of resilience and determination, standing once again as a capital, a place of administration, culture, and life. Tourists walk its streets, children play in its parks, bells ring from its restored churches. It is alive, vibrant, and functional. But the first Warsaw, the Warsaw of Chopin's notes flowing through salons, of Baroque avenues winding past elegant townhouses, of libraries filled with manuscripts, of palaces that held centuries of art, is gone. The reconstructed city, though faithful in form, cannot replace the authenticity of what was lost. Its soul, shaped by time, by generations, by the layering of history and human experience, is absent. Warsaw survives, yes, but what Warsaw was before the war exists only in photographs, in diaries, in the fading memories of those who walked its streets before the bombs fell. Imagine walking through the pre-war city. The streets are alive with merchants and students, with musicians and painters, with the hum of life that carries through cafes and parks. Children run along avenues lined with trees, their laughter mingling with the chimes of church bells. Courtyards open into gardens, fountains sparkle in the sun, and the air carries the scent of bread, of ink from libraries, of fresh paint on the palaces. Warsaw in its golden age was more than a city. It was a tapestry of life, a living museum of history, art, and culture. Then imagine the bombs falling. Picture artillery pounding into walls, fire consuming rooftops, smoke filling the streets, people fleeing in panic, families torn apart, buildings reduced to nothing but rubble and ash. Picture the meticulous destruction of centuries, the methodical erasure of art, architecture, and life. Imagine standing in the middle of a street where once stood a library, a home, a palace, and seeing only stones, dust, and the remnants of walls. That was Warsaw in 1939, and then again in 1944, a city dying twice, its heart shattered, its soul buried under debris. Walking through Warsaw today, you might see the reconstruction and feel life returning. You might see the old town rebuilt with painstaking care, the royal castle restored, the market square alive with activity. Yet beneath the surface, in the shadows of restored facades, the echoes of the original city linger. You sense the absence, the streets that no longer carry the same rhythm, the buildings that do not breathe with centuries of life, the air that misses the music, the conversations, the humanity that once filled it. The reconstructed Warsaw is a tribute, a remembrance, but it is not the original. Warsaw teaches us about the fragility of urban life, about how quickly history can be erased, about how resilient human spirit can be in the face of such loss. It is a story of destruction and survival, of annihilation and reconstruction, of memory and forgetting. The city that died twice reminds us that war does not only kill people, it kills culture, identity, and continuity. And it reminds us that reconstruction, though heroic, cannot fully restore what has been lost. Close your eyes and picture the city as it was. See the palaces, the libraries, the Baroque streets, the cafes, the theaters, the markets bustling with life. Hear the music of Chopin drifting through the air, the bells ringing from churches, the laughter of children in courtyards, and then picture the devastation, the bombs, the fire, the smoke, the rubble, the silence where life once thrived. Picture the faces of those who survived, haunted by what they could not save, walking through streets that had become graves, streets that held both life and death. Warsaw exists today in form, but the original city lives only in memory. It is a city of ghosts as much as of people. Every step on the reconstructed streets is a step over history, a layer of life that once existed but is now only faintly present. The music that once floated through its avenues has been replaced by modern sounds. The markets are rebuilt, but they do not carry the centuries of human interaction that gave the old city its soul. Warsaw survives, yet Warsaw is lost. As you rest tonight, let the story of Warsaw stay with you. Think of the city that died twice, of the people who fought, of the homes that vanished, of art and culture obliterated, of streets flattened and rebuilt. Remember that memory is what keeps the city alive, that the first Warsaw exists in the minds of those who remember, in the photographs, in the stories passed down, in the echoes of history that whisper beneath modern buildings. The second Warsaw thrives, but the first Warsaw, the one of life, music, and centuries, is a ghost walking beside it, a city forever lost to time, yet impossible to forget. Warsaw, a city that died twice, a city rebuilt with courage, a city that exists in form but whose soul remains in the silence of memory. Its story is a testament to both human resilience and the tragic cost of war. And as you drift into sleep, let the memory of the original city linger in your mind, a ghost of what was, a warning of what can vanish, and a reminder that to remember is to resist forgetting. Normandy, June 1944. The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and distant smoke as Caen awoke under a fragile sun. A city with roots stretching back to William the Conqueror, where cobbled streets wound past Norman churches and medieval abbeys, where markets had thrived for centuries, now stood on the edge of a nightmare. For generations, Caen had known peace, the rhythm of ordinary life marked by church bells, the chatter of townspeople, and the quiet movements of farmers and merchants. But in the summer of 1944, that peace was about to be shattered. The Allies had landed on the beaches of Normandy, and the push inland meant destruction as a necessary tool, or so the strategists said. Caen, a city that bore no responsibility for the war, found itself caught between two colossal forces. German defenders, entrenched and determined, turned every street into a line of fire. Allied forces, intent on liberation, bombed and shelled with precision and desperation. The result was devastation beyond measure. Imagine the medieval streets once lined with timbered houses, shops spilling over with goods, children playing by fountains, only to be torn apart by the thunder of artillery. Roofs collapsed, walls crumbled, fires raced through neighborhoods. The abbeys that had survived centuries of human history were reduced to charred ruins. Churches, some dating back to Norman times, shattered under bombardment, their bells silenced forever.
Markets where merchants had traded for generations became rubble-strewn squares, the smell of bread and cheese replaced by smoke and dust. The people of Caen endured weeks of relentless fire, families huddled in cellars listening to the roar above, praying that their homes would not be the next to collapse. Children were kept close, mothers tried to soothe fear with whispered words, fathers attempted to protect what remained of their possessions, but there was little that could withstand the fury raining down from sky and earth. Each day brought new losses, each night carried the uncertainty of survival. Paris, by contrast, was spared the same fate. Its avenues, grand and orderly, were untouched by the grinding teeth of war that tore through Caen. And yet Caen bore the cost of liberation, a city sacrificed for strategy, for military necessity. Its destruction was almost total, streets flattened, homes erased, abbeys scarred, churches gutted. The living moved among the dead, and the dead lay among the ruins. Smoke and dust hung in the air long after the bombardment ceased, settling into every corner of the shattered city. Imagine walking through Caen during those days. The streets once vibrant with life, now filled with the echoes of explosions and screams. Horses and livestock panicked, carts overturned in chaos, smoke choking the sunlight. Survivors stumbled through streets that were no longer streets, carrying whatever remnants of life they could find. Every step was perilous, every building a potential tomb. And yet, amidst the horror, the human spirit endured. People sought water, food, shelter, and each other. They tried to maintain dignity in the face of incomprehensible loss, to remember that life, however battered, could persist. The castle of William the Conqueror, once a symbol of power and permanence, still stands today, but scarred by the fire of war. Its stones, blackened and pockmarked, tell the story of a city caught between giants. The abbeys and churches, even in ruin, hold the memory of centuries, a reminder that human creation can be fragile when faced with the machinery of modern warfare. The city that survived, that rebuilt, carries these scars as silent witnesses to the cost of freedom. Few today remember the specific suffering of Caen. Tourists pass through modern streets, modern squares, cafes buzzing with life, unaware of the history buried beneath. They see a city that has risen from ashes, restored and functional, yet they do not see the weeks of fire, the fear, the rubble, the civilians who lived through destruction beyond imagination. The memory of Caen's endurance exists mostly in photographs, in accounts, in the faint markings of damaged walls, in the stones of William's castle. To understand Caen, one must imagine what was lost: the abbeys that had withstood centuries of human activity, the churches that had witnessed generations of births, marriages and funerals, the markets that had been the heartbeat of the city, all vanished in a storm of metal and fire. Families were displaced, livelihoods destroyed, the urban fabric ripped apart. Reconstruction would come, yes, but it could never replace the authenticity of what had existed, the accumulation of centuries, the ordinary yet irreplaceable life of a medieval city. The weeks of fire left psychological scars as well as physical ones. Survivors carried trauma, loss, and the constant reminder that their city had been sacrificed for the greater strategy of war. Streets they once knew intimately became dangerous, unfamiliar, alien. Children who had known only a few narrow lanes now had to navigate rubble, ashes, and corpses. Mothers and fathers who had known their neighborhoods intimately found them unrecognizable, flattened, blackened, and scorched. And yet, people endured. Amid the ruins, community persisted. Humans, remarkably, always find ways to endure. Walking through the ruins, one could see the traces of ordinary life frozen mid-motion. A market stall collapsed into dust, jars smashed, goods scattered, windows shattered, furniture splintered. Children's toys lay among bricks. Clothing, a remnant of survival, hung from broken beams. Fires had consumed everything else, but memory, as fragile as it is, persisted. The living tried to cling to what they could salvage: photographs, letters, small possessions, fragments of the life that had existed just days before. Caen, unlike other cities spared the worst, became a lesson in the cost of liberation. Its story is not widely told outside the region, overshadowed by the more famous cities of war. Yet for those who endured, it is unforgettable. The sacrifice was not only in the military sense, but in the human, cultural, and historical sense. A city of abbeys, markets, churches, and homes was brought low so that freedom could advance elsewhere. The streets that rose again carry a memory that can never be fully erased, a whisper of the suffering endured by ordinary citizens caught in the tides of history. Imagine standing in Caen today. The streets are restored, modern buildings rise beside remnants of medieval stone. Cafes hum, cars pass, children play.
Yet if you pause, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint echo of explosion, the whisper of smoke rising through ancient walls, the memory of weeks of fire and fear. The city survived, rebuilt itself, flourished once more, but it did so with scars. Scars not only in stone, but in memory, in collective consciousness, in the very fabric of life. The castle, still imposing, stands as a sentinel over the city.
Its walls blackened and marked, yet steadfast. It bears witness to centuries, to kings and conquerors, to ordinary citizens, and to the war that nearly erased all of them. It tells the story of sacrifice, of endurance, of human resilience. It is a reminder that freedom often comes at a price paid by those least responsible for conflict. Kane's survival is a testament to the courage of its people, to their determination to rebuild, to their ability to endure even when all seemed lost. And as night falls over Caen, the silence is heavy with memory. The streets may be lively, the markets bustling, the city alive, yet the ghosts linger. The echoes of children's cries, the crackle of fire, the whispers of families huddled in fear, all remain embedded in stone and memory. Caen, a city sacrificed, a city scarred, a city rebuilt, is both a warning and a tribute. It reminds us that war spares none entirely, that ordinary people often pay the heaviest price, and that even when cities rise again, what was lost can never be fully restored. Tonight, let Kane's story remain in your mind. Picture the medieval abbeys, the Norman churches, the cobbled streets, the markets alive with life. Picture the roar of bombs, the flames consuming homes, the smoke that darkened the sun. Picture the citizens huddled in fear, trying to protect children, to save what little remained. And then see the city today, alive and thriving, yet carrying invisible scars that stretch across decades. The stones of William's castle remind us that history is both fragile and enduring, that sacrifice is never forgotten, even when the world moves on. Caen, the forgotten sacrifice, the city of fire and rubble, stands as a testament. It is a city that survived devastation, endured weeks of terror, rebuilt itself from ashes, and yet carries forever the memory of what was lost. It is a lesson in resilience, in endurance, in the human capacity to endure even the most unimaginable loss. Its story is quiet, often overshadowed, yet profound, a reminder that the cost of freedom is real and that behind every victory lies the shadow of sacrifice. July 1943. Hamburg, a city of waterways, canals, and bustling harbors, stood as a testament to centuries of Hanseatic pride. Its timbered warehouses lined the Elbe, gleaming in the sun, brimming with goods, commerce, and history. Merchants had traded here for generations. Sailors had returned to these docks with tales of distant lands, and the streets echoed with the rhythm of everyday life. Footsteps, horse-drawn carts, the calls of vendors, and the laughter of children. The medieval charm of Hamburg, built over centuries of prosperity and maritime tradition, seemed eternal. But war, as it often does, shows no respect for charm or eternity. Operation Gomorrah descended upon Hamburg in the summer of 1943, a plan as methodical as it was merciless. For 8 consecutive nights, the RAF and the United States Army Air Forces unleashed a torrent of bombs designed to cripple the city, to shatter not only its infrastructure but its spirit. Hamburg became a crucible of fire, a city transformed into hell itself. The first night brought shock. Air raid sirens wailed across the city, echoing off brick facades, echoing through narrow lanes, carrying fear into homes and hearts. Citizens scrambled to shelters, carrying whatever possessions they could clutch. Families huddled in cellars, praying, listening as the sky thundered above. The explosions came in waves. First the heavy bombs to destroy buildings, then incendiaries designed to turn the city into a furnace. And then came the firestorm. Wind and flame combined into a living thing, sweeping through streets, dragging oxygen from lungs, suffocating those who had survived the initial blasts. The heat was so intense it could melt metal, ignite clothing, set entire blocks ablaze within minutes. Timbered houses, centuries old, caught immediately, feeding the inferno with the very wood that had given the city its character. Windows shattered, rooftops collapsed, and smoke billowed in immense black clouds, blotting out the moon, the stars, the sun itself. People ran through streets that had become rivers of fire. Mothers carried children, fathers tried to protect them, neighbors helped neighbors, yet there was almost nowhere safe. Shelters, once considered refuges, were sometimes engulfed by flames or crushed by collapsing buildings. Those who survived the initial bombings were trapped in a heat so intense it could scorch skin through clothing and ignite debris in seconds and force people to flee blindly through smoke and flame. The streets, canals, and squares of Hamburg were no longer familiar.
They were unrecognizable, a landscape of terror. Over 40,000 people died in that week. Many were incinerated where they stood, consumed by flames or smoke. Others succumbed later to injuries, burns, or the psychological weight of unimaginable trauma. The sheer scale of destruction was staggering. Entire neighborhoods vanished in a single night. Churches that had survived centuries, silent witnesses to history, were reduced to charred stone. Timbered warehouses, the pride of Hamburg's seafaring merchants, collapsed into smoking rubble. Markets, schools, and theaters, the everyday life of a city, were obliterated. And yet, amid the chaos, life persisted. Some survivors dragged themselves from the ruins, searching for family, for food, for water, for meaning. Streets that had once been thoroughfares of trade became avenues of grief and survival. Neighbors mourned together, shared scarce resources, and tried to make sense of the unimaginable. The human instinct to endure, to survive, persisted even when the city itself seemed to reject it, when the very air burned with fury. Hamburg's firestorm was more than physical destruction. It was cultural annihilation. Centuries of Hanseatic tradition, of maritime history, of craftsmanship and artistry were erased almost overnight. The old city, with its timbered houses, narrow streets, canals, and marketplaces, no longer existed. Photographs, documents, and memories became the only testimony to a world that had been. Families who had lived in the same streets for generations were scattered, their homes gone, their histories erased in the flames. Unlike Dresden, whose destruction became a global symbol of wartime suffering, Hamburg's agony is less often spoken of, though its scale was even greater. Over 40,000 dead, hundreds of thousands displaced, and the city itself, a medieval port, a living monument to centuries of human activity, reduced to cinders. The Hanseatic charm, the timbered warehouses, the spires, the canals, the everyday life of ordinary people, all gone. The firestorm left nothing but ruins, ash, and memory. Imagine walking through Hamburg before the bombings. Picture the canals reflecting the sky, the streets alive with merchants, the warehouses full of goods, the smell of bread and smoke from bakeries mingling with the scent of the harbor. Imagine children playing near fountains, sailors returning from voyages, people greeting neighbors on cobblestone streets. The city was alive with centuries of history, commerce, culture, and ordinary life. Now imagine the sky above thick with planes, the roar of engines, the whistle of bombs falling. Picture streets collapsing, buildings ablaze, wind fanning the flames into towering infernos. Picture families fleeing, children screaming, neighbors helping neighbors, yet no one truly safe. Picture fire consuming timbered houses, smoke choking the air, canals reflecting flames instead of the sun, streets disappearing under rubble and fire. That was Hamburg, the city consumed by Operation Gomorrah. The aftermath was catastrophic. Streets were unrecognizable, neighborhoods gone, cultural landmarks reduced to rubble. Survivors emerged into a city that no longer made sense, a city that was simultaneously home and ghost. They had survived, but the city itself had been erased. Rebuilding would take years, decades even. And while modern Hamburg thrives today, the scars of fire linger in memory and history. The old Hanseatic port, the medieval city of trade, of timber, of canals and spires cannot be fully restored. It exists now only in photographs, in stories, in the imagination of those who remember. Walking through Hamburg today, it is difficult to imagine the inferno that consumed it. Modern streets, offices, and apartment buildings stand where timbered warehouses once lined canals. Bridges span waterways that carried merchants and goods for centuries. Yet if one listens closely, if one studies the stones of old churches or the foundations of rebuilt structures, the echoes of destruction remain. Memory, photographs, and stories are all that preserve the city that burned. The human toll was immense, yet the city rose again. Rebuilding was slow, arduous, and fraught with challenges. Streets were cleared, rubble removed, modern buildings erected, yet the medieval charm, the intricate timberwork, the narrow winding streets, the centuries of Hanseatic culture, those were lost forever. Hamburg's firestorm teaches us that war does not just kill, it erases. It consumes life, culture, and memory alike. Imagine standing in a rebuilt Hamburg square today. The hum of traffic, cafes bustling with people, children playing, pedestrians walking, modern offices and apartments. Beneath your feet lie the traces of a city that burned, that perished in flames, that witnessed the death of tens of thousands. Imagine the ghost of the old city moving quietly alongside the modern one. Imagine the echoes of markets, the smell of the harbor, the laughter of children, the clatter of carts along cobbled streets, all gone, existing now only in memory. The firestorm reminds us of the fragility of human life and human achievement. It shows how quickly centuries of culture can vanish, how ordinary life can be consumed in hours. It teaches us about resilience, about endurance, about the capacity of humans to survive even when the world around them is obliterated. And yet it also teaches about loss, about the cities, the streets, the culture, the history that can never be replaced once erased. Hamburg is both tragedy and lesson. It is a city that rose from fire, rebuilt with courage, with determination, with human tenacity. Yet it is also a city that carries the scars of flames and smoke, of streets and houses erased, of lives lost. It is a reminder that war spares none, that destruction can be total, that ordinary people often pay the highest price. The city stands today alive, vibrant and functioning, but beneath it lies the memory of what once was, a medieval port, a living testimony to centuries of life, destroyed almost completely in 1 week. As you close your eyes tonight, let Hamburg's story linger. Picture the canals reflecting the sun, the timbered warehouses, the markets alive with merchants, the sound of horse-drawn carts, the laughter of children. Then picture the night skies filled with planes, the roar of engines, the whistle of bombs, the fire-consuming streets, homes, churches, and lives. Imagine the chaos, the smoke, the flames, the terror, the courage of survivors. Hamburg became hell on earth, a firestorm that erased centuries of history in days, leaving behind memory, loss, and the resilience of those who endured. Hamburg, a city of fire, of ash, of memory, a city that perished almost completely, yet rose again from the ruins. Its story is less spoken of than Dresden's, yet its scale was immense, its agony profound. The medieval charm, the timbered warehouses, the centuries of seafaring memory, the ordinary life of generations, all gone, replaced by modern streets and buildings. And yet, in the whispers of history, in the photographs, in the foundations, in memory, Hamburg remains, a city both destroyed and remembered, a firestorm that teaches, warns, and endures. Nuremberg, Germany. A city where the weight of history presses against every cobblestone, where Gothic spires reach toward the sky, and half-timbered houses line streets that had echoed with life for centuries. Nuremberg was more than a city. It was a symbol of culture, art, and imperial ambition. Albrecht Dürer had walked these streets, painting and sketching, leaving a mark that would endure for centuries. Markets bustled with merchants and shoppers, bells tolled from ancient churches, and music flowed through squares where generations had gathered. The old town carried the accumulated weight of history, a living testament to the creativity and ambition of its people. Yet history has a way of turning pride into tragedy. By 1945, Nuremberg had become a target in the final throes of a war that had ravaged Europe. The city, once the stage for Hitler's grandiose rallies designed to glorify a 1,000-year Reich, was now about to meet its own inferno. The same streets that had been filled with patriotic pageantry would be swallowed by bombs. The same squares that had celebrated empire would be reduced to rubble. The irony was cruel. The 1,000-year Reich, glorified with pomp and ceremony, would leave Nuremberg as ash. The bombings began with a thunder that rolled across the city, shaking windows, collapsing roofs, and transforming familiar streets into landscapes of terror. The air smelled of smoke, burning timber, and dust. Residents huddled in cellars and shelters, clutching what they could: photographs, small keepsakes, pieces of life that seemed trivial in the face of devastation, yet priceless when the world outside was falling apart. Fires spread quickly, fanned by winds that carried the embers into every alley, every square, every half-timbered facade. Imagine walking through Nuremberg in those days. The marketplace, once alive with merchants selling spices, fabrics, and pottery, was now a field of rubble. The churches, some of them standing for hundreds of years, had lost their spires, their bells, their ability to mark the passage of time. The streets were littered with the remnants of ordinary life: shoes, books, letters, furniture, all consumed or scattered by the bombardments. The city, so proud and historic, seemed to vanish under the relentless storm of steel and fire. Yet destruction was not just physical, it was cultural, spiritual, and psychological. The art that had been nurtured here for centuries, Dürer's influence, the paintings, the sculptures, survived in fragments or was destroyed outright. Music that had once floated through town halls, churches, and private homes was silenced. Families lost not just their homes, but the accumulation of lifetimes, the heirlooms, the memories embedded in walls, streets, and windows. Nuremberg, a city that had stood as a beacon of creativity and commerce, was now
a city of ruin. The irony of the destruction is bitter. Nuremberg had been chosen by the Nazi regime for its symbolic value, a city that could represent power, order, and tradition. It had hosted rallies meant to impress, to intimidate, to glorify an ideology built on illusion. And yet that very city, once adorned and celebrated, became a casualty of the war itself. The streets that had cheered were flattened. The homes that had housed citizens for generations were gone. The medieval old town, one of the most beautiful in Germany, ceased to exist, lost in flames and bombs. Amid the chaos, ordinary citizens struggled to survive. Mothers gathered children, fathers searched for shelter, neighbors helped neighbors. Each step outside a cellar was a gamble. Each building might collapse at any moment. Fires consumed what remained of structures, turning streets into rivers of flame. Smoke and ash filled the air, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to see, difficult to imagine a future. Yet, even in destruction, the human instinct to endure persisted. People clung to one another, salvaged what they could, and waited for the storm to pass. When the skies finally cleared, Nuremberg was unrecognizable. Streets were flattened, homes reduced to rubble, churches gutted, cultural landmarks erased. The city's medieval character, its Gothic architecture, the half-timbered houses that had charmed travelers and inspired artists, were gone. What remained was a city in ruins, a testament to both human ambition and human destruction. And yet even in rubble, there was resilience, a quiet determination to rebuild, to restore, to survive. The post-war city rose again, slowly, carefully, reconstructing what could be reconstructed. Modern buildings took the place of destroyed homes. Streets were cleared, squares restored, but the authenticity of the old Nuremberg, the character built over centuries, was forever lost. Today, visitors walk through reconstructed streets, see facades restored to their former appearance, but they cannot feel the soul of the city as it existed before the bomb. The art, the music, the spirit, the life of the medieval old town, those are memories preserved only in photographs, stories, and the fragments of stone that survived. Imagine the contrast between before and after. Before, Nuremberg was alive with commerce, culture, and human connection. Streets echoed with footsteps, marketplaces rang with the calls of merchants, churches carried the sound of organ music and bells, squares hosted celebrations, and art flourished in workshops and galleries. After, the streets were empty, flattened, and smoking. Buildings were reduced to foundations, the remnants of walls, and shattered windows. The life that had animated the city for centuries was extinguished, leaving survivors to navigate a landscape both familiar and alien. The story of Nuremberg's destruction is often overshadowed by the city's post-war role in the trials that prosecuted Nazi leaders. But the ruined city, the destruction of art, architecture, and ordinary life, is a story too easily forgotten. The trials became the symbol of justice and reckoning. But the physical and cultural loss of Nuremberg is equally significant. It reminds us that war does not only kill people, it destroys memory, culture, and identity. A city's soul can be obliterated as easily as its buildings, and Nuremberg's medieval heart was reduced to ash before the world turned its gaze to the courtroom. Walking through Nuremberg today, one can see signs of history, glimpses of the past, and restored beauty. But beneath the modern streets, beneath the reconstructed facades, lie the echoes of what was lost. The medieval charm, the art that adorned walls and galleries, the music that filled halls and churches, the ordinary life of generations gone. The city survived, yet its spirit, the intricate layering of centuries, cannot be fully restored. To imagine Nuremberg as it was is to imagine a city alive with art, music, and commerce, where the human story unfolded in every street, every home, every square. To witness its destruction is to understand the full scope of war, the way bombs can erase culture as easily as lives. And to walk its rebuilt streets today is to recognize resilience, human determination, and the desire to preserve memory, even when what is remembered can never be fully restored. The city's medieval streets, its Gothic spires, the timbered houses that survived centuries, were transformed into ruins. Families were displaced, culture was erased, art was destroyed, music silenced. Yet the human spirit endured, and the city eventually rose from the ashes. The contrast between destruction and reconstruction, between what was lost and what remains, defines Nuremberg's story. The city exists today, functional, thriving, remembered for trials and history, but the medieval old town, the art, the music, the spirit, is lost, existing now only in memory. As night falls over Nuremberg, one can imagine the ghosts of the old city walking the reconstructed streets.
Merchants, artists, families, children, musicians, and bell ringers moving through the alleys and squares that no longer exist. Their laughter, their music, their lives, all silenced by war, yet present in memory. The city that rose from the ashes carries their legacy, a reminder that even in the shadow of destruction, human resilience persists. Nuremberg, a city of empire and art, of medieval charm and human life, destroyed and rebuilt, remembered and forgotten. Its story teaches us about the fragility of culture, the impermanence of human achievement, and the resilience of those who endure. The medieval old town may be lost forever, but its memory, its art, and its spirit live on, quietly, in the shadows of the rebuilt city, whispering reminders of what once was and the cost of history's flames. March 1945. Tokyo, a city of centuries-old wooden houses, winding alleys, and bustling markets, stood as a living testament to Japan's culture, history, and human life. Edo, the old heart of Tokyo, carried centuries of tradition. Narrow streets lined with merchants' shops, temples rising above rooftops, gardens blooming in quiet corners, the hum of daily life echoing through neighborhoods. Children ran along alleyways, women carried baskets from markets, men returned from labor or river trade. The rhythm of the city steady, familiar, enduring, yet that rhythm would not survive the night. The sky, once the pale blue of spring, turned dark with smoke and anticipation. Napalm, the weapon of modern destruction, rained down in torrents, a firestorm designed not merely to kill, but to erase. Tokyo's wooden houses, designed for warmth and lightness, became kindling for an inferno. Roofs ignited instantly, walls burned with astonishing speed, and streets were transformed into rivers of flame. Those who had survived conventional warfare found themselves helpless against a fire that moved like water, engulfing everything in its path. Imagine standing in Tokyo that night, feeling the heat before seeing the flames. A crackling roar filled the air, punctuated by explosions and the collapse of buildings. Smoke-choked lungs, stung eyes, and hid escape routes. Families clutched children, neighbors tried to help each other, but the fire was relentless, moving faster than human response. Alleyways that had been familiar for generations were consumed in minutes. Temples, some centuries old, vanished in clouds of smoke. Gardens, serene and sacred, became nothing more than ashes. Markets, once alive with chatter and trade, were obliterated. The death toll is staggering. 100,000 lives extinguished in a single night. Men, women, and children, ordinary citizens caught in extraordinary destruction. Survivors carried trauma as heavy as the ruins themselves, struggling to comprehend the scale of loss. The city's infrastructure, its homes, its streets, its heartbeat, all turned to ash. Even those who survived the night faced a world unrecognizable, a city that no longer bore the familiarity of its past, a landscape altered forever. The firestorm of Tokyo was not the slow, methodical destruction of conventional bombing. It was instantaneous, sweeping, unstoppable. Wooden houses, tightly packed, fed the flames, and the firestorm created its own winds, sucking oxygen and spreading embers across districts. People ran, trying to escape, but the streets themselves became traps. Smoke and heat distorted vision and judgment. Children were lost in the chaos. Families separated. Lives ended in seconds. Escape was impossible for many. This was a human catastrophe as much as a military one. The city was not just a target, it was a living organism, and the firestorm consumed it entirely. The old Edo, with centuries of culture, architecture, and human activity, disappeared in hours. The markets, the temples, the homes, the gardens, all gone. The city's character, its history, its soul, was obliterated. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are remembered for the atomic bomb, but Tokyo's firebombing claimed more lives, yet it remains largely absent from the collective memory of the world. A forgotten apocalypse in the heart of Japan. Survivors faced a landscape unrecognizable. The streets, once familiar, were littered with rubble, ashes, and corpses. Smoke lingered for days, suffocating and unrelenting. The cries of those injured, the moans of the dying filled the air. People scavenged what little they could, searching for family, for food, for water, for hope. Schools, hospitals, and temples had been destroyed, leaving the city without the infrastructure to care for its own. Those who could move walked through a wasteland that had once been a home, a community, a city alive with centuries of human activity. The cultural loss is immeasurable. Wooden temples that had survived earthquakes and fires for centuries vanished in minutes. Gardens designed over decades were reduced to smoldering soil. Merchant shops containing not just goods but family history, records, and memories were incinerated.
The architecture of old Tokyo, the aesthetic of Edo preserved over centuries, was erased. What remained was ash, smoke, and the memory carried by the few survivors. And yet, amid the devastation, life persisted. People rebuilt neighborhoods, salvaged fragments of history, and attempted to restore order from chaos. The reconstruction of Tokyo would take years, decades even. Yet the original Edo could never be restored. Its streets, houses, and alleys existed only in memory, in photographs, in the stories of those who survived. Children born after the war would know only a modern city, unaware of the alleys, wooden houses, and gardens that had defined life before the fire. Imagine walking through Tokyo today. Modern buildings, wide streets, neon lights, and bustling traffic obscure the memory of what was lost. Temples and gardens exist, rebuilt or relocated, but the original Edo, with its unique wooden architecture and winding streets, remains gone. One can stand in a modern district, unaware that centuries of culture and history once thrived there, obliterated in a single night. The city functions, thrives, prospers, yet carries beneath its concrete and steel the memory of fire and loss. The firebombing of Tokyo was a warning of modern warfare's capacity for destruction. It was a demonstration of how human life, culture, and history could be consumed in a matter of hours. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the destruction was not concentrated in a single blast, but spread across districts, a wave of fire and death that left no part of the city untouched. 100,000 people perished, countless more injured or displaced, and the city itself transformed beyond recognition. Yet, in the global memory of World War II, Tokyo's Night of Fire is overshadowed, a quiet tragedy eclipsed by the atomic bombings. Walking through reconstructed neighborhoods today, it is difficult to imagine the inferno. Streets are busy, shops open, trains run, children play, yet beneath the modern city lies the memory of destruction. The lives lost, the homes incinerated, the culture erased, the wooden Edo consumed, all remain in memory, in history, in the scars hidden beneath asphalt and concrete. The city survived, rebuilt, and modernized, but what was lost cannot be replaced. The firebombing also highlights the vulnerability of human habitation, particularly when centuries of architectural tradition collide with modern warfare. Wooden houses, tightly packed neighborhoods, centuries-old temples, these were not merely buildings, they were the expression of culture, of identity, of ordinary human life. In one night they were reduced to ash, and with them, generations of history, knowledge, and memory. Survivors carried not just physical trauma, but the psychological weight of knowing that the city they loved, the Edo they knew, was gone forever. Tokyo's Night of Fire is a lesson in the scale and intensity of modern destruction. It teaches us about the fragility of human life, the vulnerability of culture, and the impermanence of physical structures. It reminds us that war is not only fought on battlefields, but in cities, in homes, in places where people live, love, and create. And it reminds us that memory is crucial, for what is forgotten is lost twice, once in destruction, and again in silence. Imagine the cries, the smoke, the heat, the flames, the chaos. Imagine the streets turned into rivers of fire, the canals filled with ash and debris, the markets and temples consumed. Imagine families separated, lives ended, culture erased. Imagine the horror, the courage, the struggle to survive amid impossible conditions. That was Tokyo, a city consumed by fire in a single night, a forgotten apocalypse in the heart of Japan. And yet life persisted. People rebuilt, communities formed, Tokyo rose from the ashes, but the old Edo, the wooden city with its alleys, temples, gardens, and markets, exists now only in memory. One can visit modern districts, see restored temples, walk reconstructed streets, but the original city, the soul of Tokyo before March 1945, is gone. What was lost cannot be replaced. Its absence is a silent witness to the cost of war, a reminder that human achievement, no matter how enduring it seems, can be destroyed in hours. Tokyo, a city of fire, of loss, of survival, stands today as a modern metropolis, yet beneath its thriving streets lie the echoes of a night that claimed 100,000 lives. A city burned not by atom but by waves of fire, a city erased, yet rising again. Remembering that night is crucial. Remembering the wooden houses, the gardens, the temples, the winding alleys, the markets, and the people who lived, loved, and perished, there is an act of respect, a way to preserve memory in a world that often forgets the quiet catastrophes. March 1945, Tokyo, Night of Fire. 100,000 lives ended, districts vanished, culture obliterated. The wooden Edo with centuries of history gone. Survivors rebuilt, modern city rose, yet the past exists only in memory.
A forgotten apocalypse in the heart of Japan, a night remembered by few, but forever etched in the shadows of history. Across the vast plains of Eastern Europe, in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, countless small towns and villages existed for centuries, places where life followed the quiet rhythm of seasons, where families tilled the land, children played in the streets, and communities celebrated harvests and weddings with laughter and song. These were places of ordinary life, humble and enduring, often overlooked in history books, yet each one carrying its own story, its own culture, its own human heartbeat. During the chaos of World War II, these towns became targets, not for their strategic importance, not for their armies or industry, but because of the indiscriminate violence that swept across the continent. Fire, gunfire, and the cold efficiency of scorched earth tactics reduced entire villages to ashes. Wooden homes, thatched roofs, and small churches were consumed in minutes. Families who had lived in the same place for generations vanished almost overnight. Some towns were shelled, others were set alight deliberately. Many were abandoned under the terror of occupation, only to be erased later. Take Katyn in Belarus, a village that no longer exists except in memory. Once a small settlement of houses, a church, and a school, it was destroyed completely. Flames consumed every building, every street, and every piece of human life that had filled it. Only chimneys remained, standing like silent sentinels over empty fields, markers of a community erased. The villages were massacred. The town, its history, its culture, and its people disappeared almost entirely from the world, leaving only the memory preserved in the hearts of those who survived, and in records that fade a little more with each passing year. Katyn is just one example. Across the region, hundreds of villages met similar fates. Some were burned in retaliation for resistance, others as part of systematic destruction. Each time a village fell, a microcosm of human life was annihilated. The markets, the farms, the schools, the churches, the daily routines, all vanished. Children never returned to play in the streets. Farmers never tilled the fields, families never gathered again, and when the war moved on, the land often remained empty, overgrown, leaving only whispers of what had been. In Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, the pattern repeated endlessly. Small towns, often unremarkable on a map, became stages for unimaginable human suffering. They were not the great capitals or renowned ports. They were places where ordinary life unfolded quietly, lives that had little recognition outside their own communities. And yet these towns mattered. Each street, each home, each field was a world unto itself, a microcosm of human history, of continuity, of culture. To destroy them was to erase centuries of living memory. Walking through these regions today, one might see open fields, forests reclaiming what was once cultivated, rivers winding past empty banks. Here and there, a solitary chimney, a ruined wall, or a neglected cemetery hints at the human life that once existed. These landscapes are silent witnesses to history, reminders that destruction is not only measured in cities that make headlines, but also in the countless small places that never recovered, that never rose again. The erasure of these towns was more than physical. It was cultural and emotional. Names disappeared from maps, traditions died with the people who practiced them. Stories were lost before they could be recorded. Survivors carried grief that was impossible to express fully. They remembered festivals, marriages, births, and funerals that no longer had a home. Each village was a story, a world of relationships, knowledge, and shared memory, extinguished in the sweep of war. Consider the children of these villages. They had schools, playgrounds, and streets where they learned the rhythm of life. All of that vanished. Their memories became oral histories, passed down through families who survived elsewhere, fragmented and fragile. Their lives, their routines, their ordinary joys and sorrows, gone. And with them went entire layers of culture, customs, songs, dialects, ways of being that had existed for generations. In many cases, no one remained to tell the full story. The towns themselves, once home to vibrant human life, were forgotten worlds. Historians have tried to piece together these stories, yet the scale of loss is staggering. Maps that once showed hundreds of towns now display blank spaces. Census records note the absence of communities that once thrived. Survivors recount the terror of fire, the horror of occupation, the impossibility of escape. But no amount of documentation can fully restore what was destroyed. The memory of these towns exists mostly in absence, in the empty fields, in the solitary chimneys, in the silence where laughter once rang. In some cases, Memorials have been erected. Katyn, for example, is remembered as a symbol of all the villages that were destroyed in Belarus. Visitors can see the chimneys, the monuments, and photographs that attempt to capture what was lost. Yet no memorial can replace the actual village, the ordinary lives, the laughter of children, the smell of bread baking, the routine of daily life. These towns are remembered, but they cannot be rebuilt in their entirety. The living pulse of community is forever absent. This erasure is a reminder of the fragility of human settlement, particularly in times of war. Cities may rebuild, capitals may rise again, ports may reopen, but small towns are often forgotten entirely. Their absence is almost invisible on maps, almost unnoticed in history books. Yet for the people who lived there, for the families who were lost, for the culture that disappeared, the loss is absolute. These forgotten towns are testimony to the human cost of conflict, not only in lives taken, but in communities, culture, and memory erased from the world. Not all forgotten cities burn in a blaze visible to the world. Some are quietly erased over years as survivors move away, as fields reclaim streets, as forests overgrow squares, and as time buries memories. The name remains in fading records, in archives, in the stories passed down quietly from one generation to another. Yet even these traces are fragile. Without active remembrance, these towns may disappear entirely from human consciousness. To think of these forgotten towns is to imagine entire worlds lost, streets with no voices, homes with no occupants, schools with no children, fields that once fed generations now grow wild. Temples and churches are rubble or dust, leaving only the earth and sky as witnesses. Generations of people, their knowledge, their customs, their lives, extinguished in a brief moment or slowly faded from memory. Each of these towns was a world unto itself, and their erasure represents a kind of silence deeper than any battlefield. Katyn is perhaps the most famous, but it is one among hundreds, perhaps thousands, across Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Hundreds of places were reduced to nothing, leaving no one to speak their names, no walls to mark their existence, no markets to echo with life. Each village lost was a story lost, a small world erased. Together they remind us that the human cost of war extends far beyond the capitals, ports, and battlegrounds. It encompasses the quiet destruction of everyday life, the disappearance of entire communities, the death of ordinary human worlds. These forgotten towns remind us that memory is fragile, that human history is delicate, and that each village, no matter how small, holds meaning and value. They exist now mostly in absence, in records, in the stories of those who survived elsewhere. Their destruction is a silent witness to the incomprehensible scale of human suffering in war. As grass grows over empty streets, as chimneys stand alone against the sky, we are reminded that these were not just forgotten cities, they were forgotten worlds, and their loss is immeasurable. The war ended, but the echoes of destruction lingered. Across Europe and Asia, cities once alive with music, markets, and laughter lay in rubble. Streets were leveled, homes burned, cathedrals shattered, and communities erased. Yet as years passed, reconstruction took hold. New buildings rose from the ashes. Concrete replaced cobblestones. Steel and glass formed skylines that gleamed in the sun. The physical scars of war began to fade, and with them, the memory of what had been. Walk through modern cities today, and it is easy to forget. You pass a bustling supermarket and imagine a life of convenience, unaware that centuries-old marketplaces once thrived there, filled with merchants calling their wares, children darting through the crowd, the aroma of bread and spices filling the air. You drive along a highway and fail to notice the cobblestone streets that traced the rhythm of life for generations, the lanes where people celebrated births, marriages, and festivals. The cities are alive again, but the stories that once shaped them are hidden beneath asphalt and modernity. Memory fades faster than stone. Even monuments struggle to preserve the past. A cathedral rebuilt from ash cannot fully capture the sound of its original bells, the feel of its worn steps under the feet of worshippers, or the warmth of sunlight on centuries-old stained glass. Reconstructed streets can guide footsteps, but they cannot carry the voices of families who lived there, of children who played there, of lives interrupted and erased. History becomes a shadow, a whisper amid the clamor of contemporary life. Consider Coventry, St. Lo, or Cannes. Once vibrant, they were transformed by fire and steel into scenes of ruin. Today, tourists stroll through streets that have been rebuilt, cameras clicking, unaware of the centuries of life that were obliterated. The city functions, prospers, and thrives. Shops open, traffic flows, children play. Yet beneath the modern facade lies a silence, a weight of absence, a history that is known to few and felt by even fewer.
These cities are remembered in textbooks, sometimes in documentaries, but rarely in the living pulse of daily life. The tragedy is compounded by the passage of time. Survivors age, their memories fading like photographs left in the sun. Oral histories are lost as generations pass. Children grow up hearing fragments, not full stories, of the places where their grandparents once lived, loved, and died. Even historians struggle to piece together the full picture, relying on photographs, letters, and ruins. What was lived cannot be reconstructed fully. What was loved cannot be replaced. The cities may rise again, but their souls remain scattered among the ashes. This fading memory is not only a historical phenomenon, it is human. We are creatures of immediacy, drawn to what exists before our eyes. The tangible, the functioning, the now captures our attention. What lies beneath, what was lost, is more easily ignored, and yet these vanished cities whisper. In the wind, through a reconstructed square, in the shadow of a modern tower, in the subtle irregularities of a rebuilt street, there is a trace of what once existed. If one listens carefully, the past is not silent. It murmurs beneath the surface, asking to be remembered. Even small towns, forgotten in maps and censuses, leave their mark. Villages like Katin, erased from existence, survive only in monuments and fading photographs. The chimneys, standing alone amid fields, testify to lives and communities that were extinguished. Travelers may pass without noticing, but the land itself remembers. Grass grows over old foundations, trees bend where streets once ran, and the earth holds the echoes of laughter, of song, of ordinary life that was destroyed. These are quiet reminders that human life, culture, and history are fragile, and that memory is a responsibility we carry. The rebuilt cities, the modern streets, the gleaming towers, they are both triumph and tragedy. Triumph in resilience, in the human ability to endure, to rebuild, to reclaim life from devastation. Tragedy in loss, in the knowledge that what was destroyed cannot be fully restored. The streets may function again, but they are not the same. The markets may bustle, but the merchants of centuries past cannot return. The churches may toll their bells, but the footsteps of generations lost are gone. Memory fades, faster than stone, faster than the reconstruction can compensate, leaving gaps in history that can never be filled. And yet, there is a subtle persistence, in quiet corners, in small museums, in plaques and monuments, in whispered stories passed down. These cities speak. They remind us that every stone carries a memory. Even in absence, in silence, there is presence. The fire that destroyed, the bombs that leveled, the hands that rebuilt, all speak of human life, human endurance, human fragility. Walk carefully through a modern city and you might hear it. The past is there, layered beneath the present, waiting to be acknowledged, if only we remember to look. In remembering, we honor not only the cities but the lives that filled them, the artisans, the children, the families, the ordinary men and women whose daily existence created the texture of human history. Their work, their joy, their suffering, all once embedded in streets, houses, markets, and squares, can live on in memory, in story, in recognition. Forgetting them completes the destruction. Remembering is the final act of resistance, a way to preserve what bombs and fire tried to erase. The quiet fate of memory is the final tragedy of war. Cities rebuilt can hide scars, but they cannot hide absence. Streets once alive with life are now silent beneath towers and highways. Marketplaces are replaced by shops and parking lots. Homes that house generations now accommodate strangers. And yet, in their silence, they whisper. Walk slowly. Listen carefully. The ghosts of past lives murmur beneath your feet, reminding us that destruction is not only physical, that loss is not only measured in rubble, but in memory. This is the lesson these cities leave behind. To remember is to resist forgetting. To acknowledge the vanished is to honor those who lived, loved, and died. The stones may fade, the towers may rise, the highways may cover the cobblestones, but memory persists, fragile and fleeting, yet infinitely precious. Even in modernity, even amid thriving life, the ghosts of destroyed cities are never gone entirely. They whisper, faint but persistent, reminding us that every stone, every street, every empty space carries a story. The world moves forward, rebuilding, modernizing, thriving, yet beneath the surface, in the silent corners, in the shadows of skyscrapers, in the spaces where markets and homes once stood, the cities speak. The lives, the culture, the history, they are not fully lost if we remember. Memory becomes the bridge between past and present, the thread that connects what was destroyed to what exists today. We walk through them unaware,
past supermarkets where cathedrals once stood, along highways that cover the cobblestones of forgotten towns. Yet if we pause, if we listen, if we acknowledge the silence, the whisper grows. Every stone carries a memory. Every ruin, every rebuilt street, every modern tower stands atop stories that cannot be fully erased. These cities remind us quietly, persistently, that human life and culture endure not only in stone, but in memory, and that forgetting them is the final devastation of all.